to fight. No, we will run, and we will live.
Shame on you. This could be the greatest night of our lives. But you're gonna let it be the worst.
And I guarantee a week won't go by in your life you won't regret walking out, letting them get the best of you.
Well, I'm not going home.
We've got too far!
And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I'm not saying it's gonna be easy.
You're gonna work harder than you ever worked before.
But that's fine. We'll just get tougher with it.
If a person grits his teeth and shows real determination,
failure is not an option.
That's how winning is done.
Believe me when I say,
We can break this army here.
And win just one for the Gipper.
But I say to you, what every warrior has known since the beginning of time.
you've got to get mad.
I mean plumb mad dog mean.
If you would be free men, then you must
Fight to fulfill that promise. Let us
cut out their living guts.
1 inch at a time.
And they will know what we can do!
Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions.
You're like a big bear, man.
This is your time.
Seize the day.
Never surrender.
Victory or death.
That's the Chicago way.
Who's with me?
Clap! Clap! Don't let team die! Clap!
All right.
Let's fly!
And gentlemen in England, now abed. Shall
No, my name is the Lord.
But I tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take
Our Independence Day.
Ladies and gentlemen, MTA's Executive Director, Larry Merrill.
For decades, Hollywood has depicted leadership as heroism. And I imagine that some of you, when you saw our conference theme this year, the will to lead, maybe it conjured these same visions of heroism to you. And thinking, well, that's all great for the cinema, but what does that have to do with my township? Well, this past year, the MTA Board of Directors, as Doug explained in his 3 words, which I think were actually 9, were leadership, became a theme of the MTA Board of Directors. And it started without a deliberate attempt to address leadership, but some of our newer members on our board asked, how do you ascend into leadership on the MTA Board of Directors? How do you become a committee chair? How do you be put on the executive committee? And our executive committee, which is how this process works, our incoming president, such as Linda Preston this year and Doug the year before that, they look over the entire 29-member board of directors, and they each have a mental image of what leadership is and what leadership is needed for MTA. And they started talking about these mental images, the mental models that each of them that they have to seek out the MTA leadership. And they put this together in a chart. And it was a rather extraordinarily insightful description of leadership, which, as we looked at it, it goes far beyond the characteristics and competencies of leadership for the MTA board, and we thought it had great applicability to township officials in general. And the role of MTA started to be talked about more as our board of directors re-examined and recreated a new mission statement, which put the leadership of township officials, fostering that leadership as one of the key components to advancing local democracy, that suddenly leadership became a far more deliberate focus of the MTA. I'd like to share with you what the executive committee and eventually the board of directors developed in these 4 competencies of leadership. They first came across the notion of behavioral leadership. The basic, do you know how to conduct yourself in such a way that people don't think you're odd and strange? A way of conducting yourself that builds trust and respect and a sense of being able to command and make good, competent decisions. It applies to the board of directors and it applies to township officials. From there, and incidentally, other people look at behavior and have affirmed it as an important component of leadership. Even General Robert E. Lee once said, "I cannot trust a man to lead others who cannot control himself. I have no idea what he was thinking about and what that person was doing, but nonetheless, that sense of being in control of yourself was affirmed even back 200, 150 years ago as an important component of leadership." They also looked at the emotional component of leadership, what some people think of as maturity. But to me, it's that component of being in control of yourself, being self-aware, being authentic at all times, not putting on airs or thinking that because you're an elected township official, you're suddenly smarter, greater, and more important than everybody else. A candidate for president in 2012 said, "Leadership is taking responsibility and not making blame on other people." Now, I'm not going to tell you who said that because you'll judge the quote by whether you like that candidate or not, but let's just leave that quote stand as a reasonable explanation of emotional leadership. The third component, collaborative leadership, the ability to work with other people, probably historically one of the most important components of leadership in township government because, frankly, township government is sort of government by committee. I believe that a man named Orrin Woodward said, "Good leaders raise the bar for themselves. Better leaders raise the bar for others. But great leaders inspire others to raise the bar for themselves." And that's the type of leadership that collaborative leadership behavior inspires. And then fourth and finally, it's the intellectual component of leadership. The ability to think about decisions and processes, break them down into their components, to think objectively, creatively, and with vision. That's the part of township government that gets scary, because then you start getting out ahead of everybody else. But isn't that truly what leading is being out in front of other people? So those are the four basic components of leadership, the competencies that our board of directors developed. And then we started thinking, well, what is the role of MTA in leadership? Anybody here can go to any bookstore or go on the internet and you can find all sorts of resources about leadership. There is no absence of great quotes, great books, great speakers who will give you insights on leadership. But what does leadership look like in township government? Most of the leadership books and seminars that you see are really for corporate leaders. And is a corporation and the powers and competencies of leading a corporation the same as a township? A few are the same, but a township is structured very differently, very uniquely. So we started looking at what does leadership look like in township government? And we sort of discovered three different models that township officials tend to gravitate to in their leadership styles. The first one we'll talk about is the autocratic leadership. It's a historical leadership that style very popular in the 20th century, coming out of so many people in the United States having served in the military. The military teaches an authoritarian, autocratic style of leadership. I'm an officer, I've got bars on my shoulder, I get to give orders. And when people come into township government, some look to the statutes for that authority that gives them the ability to control and give direction to others. And many of the phone calls which we receive at MTA are from our members who are seeking from us that autocratic anointment that says, you as a township official can tell other township officials what to do. And unfortunately, they hang up from their calls at MTA saying, well, that didn't get me what I needed. Because frankly, the way township government is structured, there's no mayor with veto powers and the ability to issue emergency declarations and say, do this or do that. Township government, whether you're a big charter township or the littlest rural township government is government by consensus. It's government by a board. Ultimately, the way township government was structured, and if you want to know why, if you look back, who was really the thought leader that carved out township government? A lot of people say, well, township government was invented by Thomas Jefferson. You know, that really isn't true. Thomas Jefferson invented the geographic township, the survey township. The 6x6 is a way of measuring of property and creating property descriptions. But the real political structure of townships is really more the brainchild of a different president, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was president of the United States from 1829 to 1837. And if the year 1837 resonates in your mind a little bit, that's the year that Michigan gained statehood. Now, Andrew Jackson was an irascible old fellow. His inauguration, basically, he opened up the White House and said, anybody and everybody can come in, have a party. They trashed the place, by the way. I think he only did that once. But Andrew Jackson was very, very suspicious of power. Andrew Jackson thought that everybody who served the people as a public official should be elected. It was what was called the bedsheet ballot, because basically by the time you elected everybody who was on the public payroll, your ballot looked like a bedsheet. Andrew Jackson's theory of government continues in the traditions of township government today. There is nobody in charge. Everybody is in charge. A township board, collectively, with the idea that 5 heads or 7 heads are better than one, and is a check and balance on any person in township government exerting too much power and influence. So that collaborative style has been the type of leadership that MTA has historically and traditionally gravitated to. Our Township Governance Academy teaches leadership at a collaborative level. And that's an important part of being a leader. It's the notion that when I talk to township officials and I say, describe to me your job, they are most comfortable telling me I'm a public servant. I love that. I'm a public servant. Not I'm in charge, but I'm here, I was elected to serve the people. It's one of the reasons I would say, confidentially, just between you and I, if you ask me why I've been proud to serve the Michigan Townships Association for all these many 35 years or so, it is that township officials are uniquely humble as elected officials. They're authentic. They know who they are. They didn't change the moment that they were elected to office. They retain that sense that essentially what we are here to do is serve the people. And as a board member, I'm here to serve my board, to help my board be better, to help my board collaboratively, collectively figure out how to solve the problems and challenges facing my township. And that's what we do in our Township Governance Academy. But as our township leaders, the MTA Board of Directors continued to discuss this topic of leadership, it occurred to me how much deeper and another level of leadership that MTA needs to explore. And our conference committee, in selecting the will to lead as your theme today, also grasped this same sense that there's another element of leadership that we would be remiss as your state association if we did not talk about. In addition to the autocratic leader, who oftentimes is usually a one-termer and done, or the collaborative leader, the servant leader, who's here to do what the public wants, which is valuable, but there's a third leadership that we need to talk about. and it's the visionary leader. Now, the visionary leader starts to look a little bit more like that montage of Hollywood clips because it can be sometimes a bit scary. Visionary leadership means you don't have the comfort of saying, this is what the people want, this is what I've been told. Instead, it recognizes that as township officials, you have access to information, insights, knowledge, perspective, and a sense of custodian and stewardship for your community that, well, the people you meet on the street don't have. So if the only thing that elected officials do is vote the way everybody tells them to vote, is that truly leadership? And is that what Michigan needs, and is that what America needs? It's a daunting challenge to reach that balance, to recognize that there are times when America needs a leader who helps other people gain perspective and insights and inspires other people to do great. George Bernard Shaw once said that there is nothing people crave more than another person to show them what they can be and who they could be. And that truly is the form of leadership that I think is sadly missing in the 21st century. As a student of history, I happen to come to the conclusion that we're not in a unique time. America has had times when there was an absence of leadership. In fact, another one of my more favorite presidents, Harry Truman, once said that at times when there is no leadership, society stands still, acknowledging that there are times when nobody is stepping forward to show everyone the direction we need to go. Well, think about Michigan in the 21st century, and think about America. Think about Lansing. Think about Washington. Think about what people's perception and attitude is of government in general, and their attitude towards government the further it gets away from the people. The more distant government becomes, the more people fear it, distrust it, have contempt for it. And truly what happens from that sense, it engenders an attitude among public officials that they're there to keep their job instead of to do their job. And their decision-making becomes tenuous, carefully measured by polling numbers, instead of showing that sometimes in America, we have had to be greater than what we are today. I watched the generation before me build interstates, build the Mackinac Bridge, go to the moon. Where are those big audacious goals today? Who among our leaders stand up in anything other than a 30-second soundbite and try to tell us that there's something greater than what we are today that we ought to be? We are a great country, the greatest country that ever existed, with more wealth, more resources, more intellect, more insight, and a democratic form of government that ultimately is accountable to the people. There should be nothing that we can't do. And the idea that we are limited and constrained is something that I believe we are grasping onto by politicians who believe that by creating fear, they can control us. When truly, what are we fearing? When you think back of all of the things that we've been told to fear, how many of them ever really became the threat that they were presented to be? So what does that have to do with township government? Today, if you talk to people, they don't trust government in general. And you know what? I kind of like that. I think that a certain healthy skepticism, questioning, is good for America, because a government that doesn't feel accountable to the public is a government that I certainly fear. So, government at the local level, and there's no more local level than the township government, to me, You are the bridge from now to a better tomorrow. You are the form of government that people still trust the most. You are the form of government that has you as the leaders, real people with ethics, compassion, commitment, and dedication. The will to lead is that next step. It's easy to fall into this comfort level of let's just do what is safest, but Michigan is facing tremendous economic challenges, an entire disruption of our economy through a globalization of manufacturing. We struggle with health care in rural areas. We struggle with watching our children and our grandchildren move away to other states where there are greater economic opportunities. Is there anyone in this room that thinks that's a good thing, to watch our children go elsewhere where they think there are more opportunities? Michigan used to be the place that everybody moved to. We have no reason why we can't be that state again. But it is built community by community. It's not built by laws and statute and government programs from Washington and Lansing. It comes from townships being a place where people want to live, where the amenities are comfortable, where there is safety, there's security, there's good schools, and there are people in township government who they can trust. Not always agree with, but at least they know that you, in your heart, have the best interest of the community. And I don't think that there's anything less at stake than democracy itself. What would America look like without democracy? Well, it would be few people coming to the polls, people being alienated from government, people not supporting tough decisions that need to be made, extra voted millages not being voted for, calls for volunteers to work on projects, nobody shows up. Most townships are still a place where people believe it's worth their while to invest their sweat equity. But we cannot take that for granted. It means leading. So I leave you today with the hope that this week you'll pick up those tips and insights, the courage from your fellow township officials, the reinforcement that you're here to do good and not just to do your job, and truly grasp that as elected officials who have been selected by the people who put you in office, that they trust you. They only ask one thing: please have the will to lead.